Yes, it is being recorded, and you will be able to get the recording post the session, right? And whatever material I'll be talking through during the session, that would also be available to you. And going back to the plan for today, we'll be talking about Ansible, right? And why Ansible, where it fits within the pipeline, the DevOps, the CI/CD pipeline, and uh, what are other tools? Why Ansible? Why not some other tools like say Chef or Puppet? You might have heard about these tools in some forum, or might have used in some form or shape. Right. So what is the difference? What is the architecture of Ansible? What is push and pull architecture? What Ansible uses, and uh, which architecture to use, or which terminology to use in which scenario, right? And how to install Ansible. We'll do a quick hands-on, right? But I'll quickly talk about the step-by-step process to do the Ansible installation, so that you can try it out later on. Uh, right, and also at the end of the session, we will do a understand what the clustering is. Right? A relatively new concept in from an Ansible point of view, but something which we have been doing as a developer for the last so many years. So that's the plan, and uh, roughly it's 3:05 now, right? So I'll continue uh, covering these topics until about 3:50, right? So the next 45 odd minutes, and for the last 10 odd minutes, I'll be taking up the questions. Right? If you have any questions, please use the chat window. Right, I'll go back to the chat window to pick up the questions at the end of the session. But if you feel there is something burning, some really important question without getting an answer to that question, we won't be able to move forward, then please feel free to let me know that this is an urgent question. I'll pick it up there and then. Right. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's get started, guys. Let's quickly use the chat window to just help me understand if any of you participants have some understanding of Ansible, or have used it in the past in some form or shape, or using it at the moment. Guys, quickly, we just have okay, yeah. And guys, please, no harm in saying no, I don't have any knowledge of Ansible. That's the reason we are here, right? Otherwise, we would be something doing something much more important. Uh, okay, so I've got a good number of responses, and majority, roughly 90 odd percentage of those responses, say they don't have any past experience or knowledge of Ansible, and few of the participants they have. Right. So let's start with the basic. Hopefully, mm, okay. Hopefully, those who don't have any knowledge or information about Ansible, they'll be able to get at least the basic idea after this 1 hour session, right? And those who have some past experience, I mean, they can do a quick revision using this session, and probably have or ask some intermediate or advanced level kind of questions, and we can, if time permits, we can try to answer some of those questions. Let me start doing a screen share. All right. Right. So guys, I've started doing a screen share. If any of you is not able to have a look at my screen, please ping me on the chat window and see. I'll see what I can do. So let's first try and understand what Ansible is and where it fits within the pipeline. As and when you Google search DevOps, this is the kind of a picture. This is the most common picture that you'll get on Google. Right. Now let's talk about it's an Horizontal 8, or as we call in the agile and DevOps terminology, it's an infinite loop, right? Because the whole intention behind learning or setting up this DevOps pipeline, or the CI/CD pipeline, as we call it in the DevOps terminology, is to automate the process end to end, right? And to continue doing that indefinitely. Right? That's the whole purpose. Now, where Ansible or other tool sets fit within this pipeline, right? We'll ignore these other phases. We'll focus on something called as deploy and operate. These two phases. Deploy and operate are the two phases where tools like Chef, Ansible, Puppet, and even Docker, Kubernetes, they come into picture. What are these tools, or what is the need of these tools? These tools, they help us deploy the hardware plus the software. When I say hardware, uh, it means we can set up a virtual machine, right? Hardware, in no way I'm saying that we can set up a physical machine. No, we can automate the process, use a set of lines, a set of code to, let's let's assume that we have built it has some front end, some back end application, deploy that application in the production. The traditional way of doing it was to that we'll reach out to the infrastructure team. They'll help us set up a physical server. On top of that physical server, we'll be telling them that this is the operating system that I need. This is the kind of front end, back end technologies I'll be using. Right? So deploy the corresponding software. This is the database that I'll be using. Deploy the corresponding software, right? And on top of it, I'll be deploying my source code. That is how it used to work. Here, what we are trying to do is we are trying to automate this entire process. We are using a concept called as infrastructure as code to automate this entire process. So what it means is, in simple plain English, to start with, what it would help me achieve is I write a few lines of code. Let's assume I've written 100 lines of code. First few lines, they would set up a virtual server for me. Right? Let's assume it sets up an AWS virtual server, AWS EC2 instance for me. Next step within that code, what it would do is it would deploy an say operating system for me on that virtual server. Let's assume that we were using Linux for it. So, right, so second step completed. The third step would be I need Apache, MySQL, PHP, these softwares installed on the physical server, or rather on the virtual server which I have set up on AWS. So the next few lines of code would help me install all these softwares on top of the EC2 instance which I have configured or set up using a set of uh, using certain lines of code, using some programming language. Right? Earlier, I was doing all of it manually, most of it manually. But here, what we are trying to do is trying to automate all of it. Right? So once I have written a set of code, I can use it, run it anywhere I want, irrespective. I mean, irrespective of the project that I am working in. Generally, the setup of the servers and these operating systems and the softwares, at least the databases and all the front end, my back end, they remain the same a lot of times, right? On top of it, the source code gets installed. That's the major difference when you compare multiple projects. Here, what we are trying to do is we are trying to write a set of lines of code, say 100 different lines of code, which would help him automate this entire process. That is what these tools, especially Ansible, Chef, and Puppet, they are trying to help us achieve. Another challenge, what we used to have, see, Ansible is also called as a configuration management tool. Ansible is not just for deployment, but it is also used or called as a configuration management tool. Now, what exactly is configuration management? Let's try and understand what exactly is configuration management. Uh,
Varun, just a moment. I think a lot of them were telling that the voice was breaking. I mean, is it fine? Just maybe you can confirm with them once.
right, am I audible loud and clear now? Okay,
Okay. Please carry on, Varun.
right, thanks. Yeah. So Ansible is also called as a configuration management system. Let's try and understand using an example. Sometimes what happens is we'll again stick to that limp stack example where which we talked about: Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. This is the supporting software that I need for my source code to be deployed. Right. I have this lamp stack installed on my local machine. I developed a set of code. It seems to be working fine on my machine. I pass it on to the testing team. They have a separate testing environment. They want to carry out some system integration testing, performance testing, capacity testing, and all that. And they try to deploy that code, get the code running. Unfortunately, the code doesn't work. Common problem. I mean, if you've been in the industry for 4 or 5 odd years, I'm sure you would have uh, faced this situation a few times by now. Quite common problem, and not just I mean separate environment. Generally, what happens is developer one passes the set of code. Developer one was having this lamp stack in his or her own environment and pass the same set of code to developer two to do a review, to do some testing, unit testing. Even within uh, the developer one and developer two, there would be a conflict in the sense that they might not be all these softwares, all the supporting software, they might not be of the same configuration. What it means, or what I'm trying to explain with respect to configuration, is that the database that I am using might be version X. Database developer 2 might be using, or the testing team might be using, might be X plus 1. That is, they upgraded their database to the next version or the latest or the updated version available. I somehow did not do that. I continued working on database version X. So versioning issues, or when you're moving from one environment to other environment, these are quite common. And this is called as configuration management, ensuring that whatever the configuration that you have within your local environment, you ensure that the same set of configuration is available for developer 2, for the testing team, for the user acceptance, for the business users to try it out, and even within the production environment. Generally, what happens in large organizations, as and when something, a latest version of a say Linux or database is rolled out, they don't move to the latest version within the production environment. They allow the developers to try the latest version for quite some time, 6 months, an year, before moving to the latest version in production environment, and that is why we end up having these configuration or versioning issues. So how we can cut down on these configuration issues or versioning issues? We can use tools like Ansible, Chef, Puppet, or SaltStack to do the configuration management for us. Right? Again, how do we achieve this configuration management? When you are using this concept called as infrastructure as code, instead of manually setting it up, manually deploying all these softwares, you write a line, you write set of code to do this for you. So how the question would be, how would say developer 2 or tester 2, or rather the testing team, how would they not get this configuration management issue? Because when they are trying to test your application, all they would be required to do is run the same line of code on their local environment, on their local machines. What that would do is, whatever configuration you have on your machine, which you then used this infrastructure as code concept to write a set of code, the same would get replicated for for developer 2 and for the testing team. If I have a HTML hello world program, I mean, let me explain it in simple plain English. If I have a hello world HTML program, I give it to you, it would run the same way it was running on my local machine. In a similar manner, if I'm giving you a set of code which contains the configuration required to run my source code, it would run the same way on machine 1, on machine 2, or any machine you might run it onto. So that way you get rid of the versioning issues. This concept is called as configuration management. Tools like Chef, Ansible, uh, Puppet, SaltStack, they help us achieve this concept, automate this entire process, that is configuration management plus deployment, by allowing me to write a set of code. They automate these two phases for me. Guys, so far with me, can you please give me quick confirmation? Okay, thanks guys. So as and when somebody says Ansible, the first thing that should come into your mind is uh, configuration management, deployment, automation via infrastructure as code. Cool. Yeah. Now, uh, let's try and understand the architecture. Right? We'll start into the after understanding the architecture, we'll start doing the hands-on, or how actually it works in production. So let's understand the architecture. Tool like Ansible uses something called as a push architecture. Puppet uses something called as a pull architecture. Right? Now, what exactly is push architecture? See, it is used for deployment plus configuration management. Now, let's assume that I have the latest version of database available with me. Right, I'm the administrator, and I have the latest version of a database available to me. What I'm supposed to do is roll it out across the organization. So all the developers, 5,000 odd developers spread across the globe, and they should be having the latest version of the database on their machines. What I'll do is I'll, as I've been saying, I'll use something called as infrastructure as code. Write a set of code, push that code onto all the machines, all these 5,000 odd machines where I want to deploy that latest version of database. Right? Push, I mean, simple, plain English. All I'm doing is the administrator here in the, the Ansible language, we call that as the control machine, pushes whatever configuration changes or deployment that is to be taken care of to the host machines or the remote machines. Right? Control machine or the pushes the configuration management changes to the remote machine. That how it works. Pull, opposite of it. Here, all these machines which you see on the right hand side, which are the host or the remote machines, they would be polling the control machine at a scheduled time. That is after say 1 hour or every 4 hours, they'll be polling the control machine the for any configuration changes. As and when they find any configuration changes, they'll replicate the same on their own remote machines. Push does not require agents to be installed. Right? That is also a key differentiator. Key agents in the sense that Ansible is only required to be installed on the control machine. All these machines, which you can call them as host or agent machines, no Ansible is required to be installed on these agents. That is also a key difference. Whereas uh, Puppet would have something called as a Puppet master installed on the control machine, and it would have something called as a Puppet agent installed on all these remote machines. Puppet agent would poll the Puppet master at a regular interval for any configuration change. Here, Ansible, we don't need to deploy or install something called as an agent on the remote machines. Push, they are completely synchronous in the sense that you can see the changes instantaneously. Pull, uh, I mean, they can scale quite easily, but let not get into the second one. If you are able to understand the push and pull architecture, and that one is something Ansible is something called as agentless, and Puppet. This is called as it's not agentless. Right? So you need to install Puppet agents on all the remote machines. Right. Let's start with mm, the coding part. I think that's what some of you are looking for. So what I have done is I have this AWS account, right? And using this AWS account, I know what I need EC2 instances. That is fine. Setup to this is my second machine. Uh, that is this is my control node, and the one at the bottom, that is my remote node. Uh, I have used something called as Ubuntu to Ubuntu as the operating system on these two machines. Then I installed Ansible on them. Let me talk about how I installed Ansible. You can use these. I'll be sharing these set of commands with you later on, so you can try it out. But let me try to explain what each of these command does, so that when you're doing it on your own, it makes sense. I have already installed on my machine, because generally it takes a few minutes for the installation, and it's a 1 hour session. So I've already done that installation. So let me quickly talk about these commands, right? And also, guys, as I said, it's an Ansible is an agentless tool, right? So we don't install any agent on the remote machine. All you need is two machines. One is the control machine, which would be doing the push, then the remote machine where we'll be doing the push, right? So whatever we push from here, control node, that would get reflected on the remote node, right? That's how it works. What I did, I mean, all these commands are to be executed on the control node, because Ansible is agentless. We don't need to install any agent on our remote machine. What I did to start with, I used the apt-get update. Sudo is nothing but I'm running as the root user, and then apt-get update. That is do a quick update and refresh of all the repositories to start with. Next is I used the Python installation package pip to install Python. Why do I use Python? Because Ansible is based, or rather built on top of Python. Ansible is built on top of Python. Right? So what I did was I installed Python, because I'll be running some Python commands. I installed something called as Python pip installation package for Python. Right? Again, did a quick apt-get update, refresh of all my repositories. The next I did was I installed something called as software properties common. Software properties common is a package that allows me to add a new set of repositories. See, when you're installing Linux, by default, some repositories would be deployed. When we are doing this update, those repositories get refreshed. Here for Ansible, I need to create and add a new repository, which is why I'm using something called as software properties common. How it would be used is it would allow me to add a repository for Ansible. Making sense? I've written down the explanation for this command in this notepad, so you can refer to it when you are doing the installation. I installed software properties common that helped me add the Ansible repository. Right? Again, I did an update, just a refresh. Next was to install Ansible, and that is pretty much it. Command I used was to install Ansible. That is pretty much it. The Ansible would be up and running for you. These two commands, install Boto 3, you can ignore. These are actually used when you are interfacing with AWS. That is, you are, say, setting up an EC2 instance by using Ansible. You can ignore these for the moment. And if you're ignoring these two commands, you can ignore the apt-get update as well. So we are done with the Ansible installation. Once you ran this command, you are done with the Ansible installation. These three commands can be ignored. Now, Ansible installation is a two-step process. Two-step process in the sense that we need to install Ansible on our control machine. Plus, we need to set up a an SSH connection, a secure shell connection between the control node and the remote nodes, the master machine and the child machine. Otherwise, how would these machines interact or talk to each other? So we use the second step of the this installation process is to uh, set up an SSH between the control node and the remote node. How I do that SSH setup is what I did as the first step within doing within the SSH setup was I used this command ECT uh, etc Ansible host. This is my once you do the Ansible installation, a host file gets generated which contains a set of host variables and host machines. Let me open up that. This is my control machine. Right. So what this host file once I've installed Ansible, if I do a nano, that is I'm trying to get inside this host machine, what it would contain. This is the uh, default file that gets generated for me. Right. All I'm required to do here is make an entry of all the remote machines which the control node would be interacting with. Right. Make an entry of the IP addresses of the remote machines my control node would be interacting with. So this IP is the IP of my remote machine. This is my remote machine. This is my IP of my machine. What I did was I added this IP address Ansible user root. That is when you are interacting with the remote machine, work as the root user, work as the admin. Next step was to after completion of this etc Ansible host. I mean this I executed this command. What this command did for me? Let me. What this command would do is it would list all the host machines which I have listed in the host file. Right? This is the only host machine which I've listed in the host file. So it's showing me this machine. This command is just to list out all the machines. Next is to set up the SSH connection. I'm required to generate a key. How I generate that key? I use this command sudo su, that is to take me into the root user, set the password for that root user. I can use when you run this command, it will ask you to give root user a password. You can use any password you want. Exit, just come out of that. Next is key generator. Generate a private key. See, when you are setting up an SSH connection, you need to generate a private key. That private key helps build that interaction or interface between the control node and the remote node. I use this command to generate a key to see whether the key has been generated or not. I again changed my user to root user. I used this command to view the hidden.ssh file. I went into this directory.ssh, did an ls to list out all the files which are there. And when I did an ls, I'm able to see these two files, id underscore rsa and id underscore rsa.pub. id underscore rsa.pub is the key file that has been generated. This key file would be used to help me set up that SSH connection. Next, in the configuration file, this file also gets generated by default. I am required to make certain changes. Permit root login. Right, let me just show you this file. This is an auto-generated file. Right, permit root login. This is commented out by default. What I was required to do was change it. It by default it had prohibit hyphen password. I changed it to yes, and there was another option called as password authentication. It had no as the uh, as the value, which I change to yes. Right? So if I go down at the bottom, I'll be able to see that, yeah, password authentication. Both of them were commented out. Right? So I removed the comment and then changed the values. Next is I am supposed to do a restart. It's as and when you install the SSH, generate the key. It's a good practice to do a restart and yeah, do a restart. Open SSH server, open up that server, and use this command to copy the file that you have generated. The ID underscore RSA file, the private key file that has generated, to transfer this file to the IP address of the host machine, that is root at the rate IP address of the host machine. You run this command, the file that you had generated at the start, that gets copied over to the remote machine, this machine, and that's pretty much it. That's how you set up the SSH connection. Yes, SSH setup is slightly difficult to set up for the first time, but it is only a one-time setup. Right? Ansible installation, just the Ansible installation, very easy to do, but the SSH, it takes I mean a few trials and error for you to try it out. But I've listed out all these commands for you. I'll be sharing these. If you continue following these commands in the same manner as listed out in the notepad, you'll be able to do that. How do I check whether that SSH connection, that Ansible installation, that has been successful or not? So what I can do is I can try running this command, Ansible all hyphen m ping. What this command would do is it would try pinging the remote machine. It would try pinging this remote machine. Right. Let me try this command. And if the output or the result of this ping command is pong, that is ping pong, that means that yes, it is able to interact via a secure shell SSH network, and I would then be able to, yeah. So I got pong. That means that yes, SSH connection has been established successfully between my control node. This is my control node. This is my host node. Uh, Guys, everybody with me so far? Praveen, it's better to use the same AMI. And yes, SSH setup, again, I'm repeating myself, SSH setup is slightly challenging. Some trial and error would be required, uh, but you can continue following this step-by-step process to get it up and running. Uh, Now, quickly moving on, let's use that infrastructure as code concept. Uh, Guys, let's come to the questions. I'll pick up the questions at the end. Right? But you can start keying them on the chat window and I'll do a scroll. Uh, so we use something called as, so far we have looked at the installation, but how I can push something, a set of code, which can then be deployed on my remote machine. So we use something called as playbooks, right? Infrastructure as code, which I have been repeating again and again. Infrastructure as code, in the uh, Ansible terminology, we call them as playbooks. We write certain playbooks which help us. Let me. Yeah, we write something called as playbook, which is nothing but infrastructure as code, which when executed help me deploy the relevant software on the remote servers. How it would look like is something like this. Or let me open up the one that which we would be using. Yeah, something like this is a playbook or infrastructure as code. If you look at from a conceptual point of view, its playbook starts with three dashes, and these playbooks, they have a very strict format in the sense that if you don't give a space at the proper step, or you miss out any of these hyphens, then the playbooks would not work. So there is a strict format that you are required to follow. They start with the three dashes. Then something we need to list out is host, that is which host set of host you need to deploy this on. I'm deploying something on something called as web servers. Right? So if you would have noticed when I ran the yeah when I made this entry in the host file, I gave the heading as web servers. Right, that's what I'm using here. Right, if what I could have done is, instead of web servers, if I had used database servers as the heading, then I would have used the same set of heading here: host colon database server. Become true, become user underscore use, become underscore user root, become method sudo. What these are trying to do is execute these commands on the remote machine as the root user. Execute these set of commands as the root user on the remote machine. Now, the playbooks contain a set of tasks. Right? What is it? What is the task that you want to run on the remote machine? So I have listed down two tasks. First task, I started with giving it a name, that is this installs a package, right? It could have been any name. Then I used something called as apt, right? It is nothing but a module. Ansible gives us certain modules. If you would have noticed, yeah, I'm using a module called update cache, yes, state latest. What this would do is it would use the module apt to install Apache 2 for me. Next task I have is this restarts the Apache service. Once you have installed, you need to start that Apache service. Enabled yes, state equals restarted. What this would do is it would restart that service if it is not started. Let me show that to you. This is my remote machine, 13.2.35.7. What I'll do is uh, to see whether I have Apache 2 installed on this machine or not. Yes, I have Apache 2 installed, but whether I have uh, all the package installed, let me try. This Apache 2 is uninstalled. Bin data utils, that is available. Another way of checking why I'm using Apache 2 is when you install Apache, it gives you a welcome message. Let's try that out. HTTP. It's not giving me a welcome message. That means Apache 2 is not installed. What I'll do is, uh, let me just show you that playbook sudo nano install start apache 2.py. This is the same playbook that I was talking about. I'll do is sudo ansible playbook install start apache 2.py. What this command does is it runs that playbook install start apache 2.py. Py Python extension because it's built on Python. play web server, right? Web server is the set of hosts that I'm using. Task, first task, gathering facts, right? And then this installs a package, this restarts the package. This one, this installs a package, restarts the package. These are the two tasks which I had initiated. This is the IP address of the host machine. OK3, yes, it was able to do three changes. Three, uh, two changed and one installed. Now, if I try doing the same command here to see whether yes, Apache 2 has been installed. Let me see if I can see that welcome message. Yes, it works. This is the infrastructure as code concept. This is how you manage your configuration. Right? All I am required to do is, sorry, I wanted to open that up. All I wanted to do was install Apache. It could have been say Linux and then Apache, MySQL, PHP, and then whatever version I wanted of all those softwares. And on top of it, I could have installed my source code. And before doing the LAMP stack installation, I could have say uh, configured an EC2 instance as well from this set of lines of code. Everything gets automated by using this infrastructure as code concept, right? And you run this code on any machine, the configuration would remain as is. So although this shows that the code was running perfectly fine on your machine, but it's not running in the testing environment because of the various configuration differences, you would not encounter that again. Let's try running something called as to uninstall it, uninstall and stop. Uh, I have another playbook in this again, the same set of host machines, web servers. What I'm doing is first stopping that Apache service, right? And then uninstalling that Apache. State equals absent. That means that it is to be uninstalled. Let's try running that. Uninstall. Stop. If I again do that command, got deinstalled. If I open up that, do a refresh, whether I am able to get that message again, the welcome. No. This is how the infrastructure as code concept works. And yeah, I mean, we use this in the YAML, and this is code. The playbook is written in YAML language. It is English-like language, and which is yet another markup language. That's the full form. Right. Quickly, couple of minutes on the last topic, that is the clustering. Uh, see, uh, so far we have been using the command line interface, the CLI for Ansible, right? And probably that is the more popular one. That is what the experienced programmers use. But there we have a user interface as well, right, which is called as Ansible tar. Right? What Ansible tar does for us is gives us the uh, it gives us a user-friendly interface to help us achieve what we are able to achieve via the command line interface. But if you understand the command line interface, well, then using the user interface, see, we are a uh, We have been using Windows user interfaces for a long time, so it's not that difficult for us to understand, as long as you understand what is happening in the background, what is happening in the CLI. And also experienced programmers, they prefer using CLIs. Right. So we have a user interface as well, that is called as Ansible tar. And starting with the Ansible tar 3.1.1 version, I think they have introduced a concept called as cluster. What cluster means is having multiple, or rather allowing us to scale up and scale down, having multiple set of nodes to handle the traffic. In simple plain English, that's what clustering is. And how it works is, before the clustering was in place, how it used to work was, uh, we used to have one single node, one single control node, engaging with n number of, say 5,000 odd remote nodes. Multitasking, multi-threading, these concepts were not very mm, useful, or not being utilized very effectively then. So it came up with the clustering concept. In clustering concept, we have multiple set of control nodes, all managing the same set of remote nodes. How it would help us is, whatever is running on, say, this host node, this control node, the same gets replicated on the other control nodes as well. And it can be used for multi-processing and multi-threading and multitasking. Right, so you can use the first set of control node to, say, deploy something on 1 to 1000 nodes, then the other one for 2000 to 3000, 3000 to 4000, something like that. Multitasking, multi-threading, multi-processing, all these uh, good words, they are being now effectively utilized. We roughly have around 5 odd minutes, so guys, let's quickly start taking questions. Please post your questions in the chat window. In the meanwhile, I'll look at the questions which are already there. So Praveen was asking, is control node and remote node should use same AMI or can be different? Preferred is to use the same AMI, but it can be different as well. Here, what I'm using is, I'm using the Ubuntu machines, EC2 Ubuntu machines. Key file, Sagar was asking, key file generated. It's a private key. It's correct. Yes, it's a private key. Priyesh, is there any IDE to write YAML code? Yes, there are a lot of IDEs. Skill edit, Slick edit. That's one. And Notepad plus plus, that can also be utilized. Right? Visual Studio. There are, yeah, a few IDEs. Mohit was asking, how can we connect 5,000 host nodes to controller nodes? Mohit, all you'll be required to do is, in the host machine file, just make an entry. So this was my host machine, host file, in the control node. All I am be required to do is just do a one-time entry of all the servers of the control nodes and set up that SSH connection with all those nodes. Because see, SSH connection, we are doing it outside of a network here. We are not inside a network. Within your corporate, within your company, you will be already be part of a network, a local network. Right? So setting up SSH within that local network, that would be much more easier for you to do. Can we push configurational command syntax to server? Ajinkya was asking, can we push configurational command syntax to server using this? Ajinkya, yeah, you can, but it's better to use the playbooks. Why? Because then somebody can else also utilize it. Because that's the whole purpose of uh, using infrastructure as code. Rahul was asking, can same be used to push configuration updates as well as the other central changes? And yes, Rahul, uh, absolutely. All the configuration changes, generally how it works is whatever the code changes are, this infrastructure as code, this playbook would be pushed onto your GitHub repo, right? Ansible would be doing a polling of that GitHub repo at a regular intervals. As and when it configure or finds out that yes, it has a latest version of the file available, of the code available, it will do a push onto all the remote machines. Mohit, but it's a manual process. No, it's not a manual process, Mohit. It's a completely automated process. All you need to do is just write the code, push it to GitHub. GitHub would be linked with your Ansible. Ansible would at a regular intervals do a poll, mm, keep on hitting the GitHub, as and when it finds out the latest version, it will just push that onto the machines. Okay, Ajinkya was asking, can we schedule pushing of command to server using this in order to bring? Yes, Ajinkya, yes, you can schedule it. Yeah, I mean, better than scheduling is to link it with GitHub. So you just push your code to GitHub, and that would trigger the push, Ansible push to the remote machines. Yeah, Sagar, thanks for the feedback. Yes, we'll be doing the sharing the recording. Guys, any last question? Thanks, Ajinkya. Right. So if there are no other questions, guys, we'll uh, close it for the day and probably catch up some other time. Okay. Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining. Thank you.
Thanks, Varun. Thanks for the wonderful session. Okay, guys, thank you. We'll end the session now.